welcome to this latest edition of Silicon Grapevine. I'm Nitin Dahad with the Times, and today my guest is Michael Hurlston, who's the president and CEO of Synaptics. Hello, Michael.
Hi, Nitin. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So, Michael, tell me, I know most people will know Synaptics. I mean, it's got a long history, but tell me about what's Synaptics and what's your role?
Yeah, that's a great. These are the most difficult questions to answer. So, Synaptics, as you said, has been around a long time. You just told me a second ago that you had the pleasure of interviewing our founder, Carver Mead.
Indeed.
Federico Fagin and Carver founded the company in the late 1980s. So it's been around for a semiconductor company. It's been around for an eternity. But I was lucky enough to come on board about 5 years ago now. And the company, Carver and Federico founded it on sort of Synaptics as a human-machine interface. That was the general concept. And the first products, as you know, were PC touchpads. That was really what got the company going. So we had a long history as a PC company. When I came in, the company was largely focused on mobile. It had taken that same touch technology, applied it to mobile phones. It was our primary business was the touch sensor on almost every mobile phone that's out there. And myself and my management team came in and said, look, how do we make something different out of the company? And the area we tried to focus on is IoT. And I think you and I had a wonderful discussion a year or so back on that. And it's been a real build out of the company focused on IoT. Just a couple of months ago, we came out with a new set of statements saying, look, IoT is a broad area. Within IoT, we want to focus on two things. One is wireless communications, which I think we'll get into here in a minute, is a large part of my background and history in semiconductors. Yep. And the other area is processors. And we think we can make some really interesting advances in the processor area, intersecting this whole AI movement with some core technology we have around MPUs and MCUs. So that's really the focus of the company as we take it forward. It's been this kind of three generations: PC company, mobile company, now an IoT company, and in IoT focusing on processors and wireless.
Okay, good. And I mean, it's quite an exciting time to be in our industry, I guess, especially so. I mean, you started in the mid '80s, but how did you get into electronics? Did you have an interest at at school, or was there something at home that inspired you to do it? Tell us a little bit about how you got it, landed into this industry.
Yeah, I think it's pretty simple. My father actually was an engineer, electrical engineer. He was actually one of the first. He was part of Fairchild, which was really the first semiconductor company. He was a physicist by training, but had enough knowledge in semiconductor processes. He was brought over from the UK. He was you can't tell with my accent now, but when I was first born, I spoke with an accent much like yours.
Okay.
And because he was actually from England, my mother was from Ireland. He took a job with Fairchild right after they got married. And, my mother calls it the honeymoon that never ended. He was supposed to be in the U.S. for a year or two at Fairchild and ended up, they still both live here. So it's really interesting. I mean, my wife she does a lot of environmental. She's an environmental engineer, and one of their first jobs, somebody came to her with an original book from Fairchild, the original roster, the original sort of address book or whatever it was, and in that address book was my father's name, and of course many of the luminaries that formed our industry today, the Intel guys and Bob Noyce and Andy Grove and so on. So it was an all-star cast at Fairchild, and many of those folks went on to great fame and fortune. My father was a co-founder of a small semiconductor company called Micrel.
Yes.
Power company.
Yeah.
that you may be familiar with, and
Yeah.
was around the industry for a long, long time. So I come by it very, very honestly.
So you know what? Yeah, a lot of kids would say, "I'm not going to do what my dad did or my parents did," but that obviously gave you a real sort of both insight, but also inspiration. I guess you still wanted to do electronics.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, my father was a true engineer, and he stayed an engineer his entire career. I suppose if there was a departure, I realized very early on that I was a lousy engineer. My first job out of school was in design, and I I was not very good. So my hats off to all the engineers here and all the engineers that are part of your audience, because it's a tough, tough job. And I think what I quickly discovered was I was much more successful and perhaps more adept at being a marketing person. So I had an opportunity very early on in my first job, which was a relatively small company, to transition from an engineering role to a marketing role. And if there was a departure from my father, that was it, because he stayed on the engineering track his entire career and was a very, very successful engineer. But I quickly went to the dark side, as you will, and I really enjoyed the marketing and people side of the business much more than the technical side.
Now, a big part of your career was at Broadcom, but how did you get to Broadcom and sort of what was the path you took from some marketing, but then what kind of stuff did you learn and do to get where you are now?
Yeah, I was very lucky. So, early on, I was, as I said, a marketing guy. And the first 10 years of my career actually were spent with relatively small companies. The first three that I was involved in had an IPO, which was, the scale of IPOs at that particular time was much, much smaller, but it was a company called Integrated Circuit Systems that ended up being bought by IDT. And of course, one of the famous luminaries of ICS was Hock Tan, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then I went on to a company called Monolithic Power, which was not the Monolithic Power we know today, but a different one. And that company was acquired by XR. And then I went to a company called IC Works, which was acquired by Cypress. So I thought, hey, I can do nothing wrong here. I'm some sort of boy genius. Everything I touch turns to gold. There's an acquisition, it's an exit, an IPO, or what have you. So I thought, let me go figure out how to do my own company. So I, together with a couple other guys, founded a very interesting company. It was headquartered in the U.S. The engineering team was Israeli, and the primary customers were Japan. And if you understand what I call the communications continuum, you probably couldn't have a more diverse set than the Israelis and the Japanese in terms of their communication style. So we had a lot of interesting meetings. But the summary of that startup was, if you read a classic MBA book of what you're supposed to do, what we did was 180 degrees opposite. And this was in the late 90s, early 2000s, where everybody was IPOing and things were just go, go, go. We were probably the one company that miserably, and I'll say miserably, failed. So it's an absolute disaster. And so obviously the veneer of the guy that could do nothing wrong was quickly worn off. And it was painfully clear that you actually had to make some smart decisions and execute according to a plan to continue the track of success. So it ended up being a pretty resounding failure, which ultimately led me to Broadcom.
Oh, so I suppose, was that the case of you're looking to see, okay, well, be part of a bigger corporation or organization, or did you say, okay, well, let's just be a bit safe?
Yeah, no. The plan was, hey, let me go learn how to do things the right way.
Okay.
And be part of a bigger company, because I'd only been part of smaller companies. I got to Broadcom, and this was it was a $1 billion company, but it was still run by somebody, Henry Nicholas and Henry Samueli. And of course, if you know anything about Henry Nicholas, this was more chaotic than any startup I'd ever been a part of. It was absolutely insane. Nick was everything that you can read about in the press, but was a single force of nature, and obviously, drove the company. But it was not exactly a great learning environment on process, procedure, how to run a larger company. But I ended up, as you said in the preamble, staying for 16 years, and it was really, I think, a very, very successful run.
And then what sort of prompted you to leave? Was that okay? You think you'd learned enough, and now you want to go and do some other stuff, or you got some bigger roles?
Well, I was lucky, so I really I was the one executive on the Broadcom executive team that made the transition from what we now refer to as classic Broadcom, that was the Southern California-based company, to the new Broadcom, the one run by Hock Tan. And I was lucky enough to see both sides of it. And working for Hock for a short period of time, I worked for Hock for about 2 years, was a tremendous learning experience. I mean, a lot of things are said and written about Hock, but he's a brilliant businessman. He has a formula. I think that formula, to a large degree, works. When he was presenting it to us on the executive side at classic Broadcom, no one really believed all of this stuff was going to work, but to 95%, it did. And, all credit to him. I think he's built an incredibly successful company. But it was pretty clear too who was in charge, and it's most definitely Hock. And so for me personally, I'd wanted to be CEO in the old company. I'd made some good, I think, career moves to be in position to be the CEO of either Broadcom or a subsequent company. And I think it became very clear working for Hock that there was one CEO, and it was him. And again, I'll do credit, but I wanted to ultimately be a CEO. So I was lucky enough to get an opportunity at an optical company called Finisar.
Yeah.
And I joined that company in early 2018, and finally was able to run a company on my own and see how I was able to do.
Okay. I'm just going to digress a little bit, because you mentioned Hock Tan quite a bit, and I was going to ask you at some point, did you have any sort of mentors? Would you consider him a mentor, or just somebody you learned a lot from? And what was the sort of biggest lesson you learned from him?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly. He's not a mentoring type, right? Okay. But you learn a lot. A lot. I mean, a tremendous amount of respect for Hock, and I think he's a terrific human being, actually. I mean, this is not the veneer, but he's actually I think a very complicated but good person. And so in that context, there was a tremendous amount of lessons learned. And, one of the fundamental was just how to be a good businessman, how to separate and make tough decisions about business, figure out what you have that's good, that's worth investing in, and figure out what's not worth investing in, and don't be halfway about anything. I think the problem certainly that we had at classic Broadcom, and I personally had, was you'd kind of be half into something. You would not be all in or all out. You'd be, okay, well, let me test it, and let me wait for some event. Let me wait for the next thing. Let me wait for the next thing, and keep investing in something with the hope that a certain set of events will transpire that may or may not happen. And I think his school of thought is very simple. Hey, you're either in or you're out, and you got to make that decision right away and be very clear about what you're into and what you're not into, and then double down on what you're in, and take the bets completely off the table when you're out. And I think that lesson has ultimately served me well.
That sort of reminds me of something that one of my mentors always said was have a razor sharp focus on execution, and execution of the specific thing that you want. And I think that's kind of what you're implying there.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he really does focus on, I think there's constantly a knock on Hock that there's not investment in technology, and that's not true. there is an investment on technology, but it's a sharp and focused investment. So it's not, there's a concept that he talks about, green shoots. I'm not going to invest in trying to, grow a bunch of plants from seedlings. I want a really strong business and focus on that business. I'm going to double and triple down on that to make it work.
So, it's interesting, your journey. So, very small companies at the beginning, large company, some failures. So that must put you in a very good position where you are now to actually get. A lot of people talk about learning from failure and failing so that then they learn. Do you think there's a lot of that goes into what you do now today at Synaptics?
It was a learning. I mean, again, probably everything that you could see in an MBA book, that is how to run a company, how to run a business, and how Hawk would run a business, or how the Broadcom team ran a business. We were doing the exact opposite, and that was where the classic mistake was. We were chasing them as a small company. We were chasing a market that wasn't quite there, and so you're depending on revenue that is out in time. And you're going to have to keep investing, waiting for that market. But you realize by the time the market does come, you're going to be facing very serious competition from bigger players. Instead of kind of at least staying the course on that one market, what we did was we pivoted to a totally different market, a market that had different set of customers. Technology was somewhat the same, but you couldn't leverage the sales force, you couldn't leverage the support team, you couldn't leverage the customer base. So you now almost had two separate companies chasing two different markets. And as a small company, I mean, that's just a dumb thing to do. So it was a real set of lessons that then was reinforced by something you just drew to, the sharp focus Hawk and others espouse. And I think that's what we've tried to do here at Synaptics is, look, we were involved in a lot of different things. We made some tough decisions at the outset to shed some of the things that were historic to Synaptics and really were part of the root and the foundation, and then refocus on some other things that we thought would lead to better opportunity.
And now let's see. So, how did you end up at Synaptics?
Well, I was, as I said, the first job I was Finisar. That was an interesting situation, and it was an optical company. So I came into that, never having been a CEO in an industry that largely is different from semiconductors. I mean, there is a semiconductor base. You're forming. It's at the core, I think Finisar is a manufacturing company. As a $1.5 billion revenue company, it was about the same size as Synaptics. There were 14,000 people in it because you're running big factories putting together these optical modules. I did have a great mentor there. There was a fellow, the chairman of the board, a guy called Bob Stevens, that was terrific, terrific human being. Spent time with me on the business, spent time with me as, look, I've been a CEO before. This is how you need to think about leadership and CEO. Incredible human being. I was really lucky, but what we ended up doing was selling the company, because as a U.S.-based company, I felt it was going to be difficult to deal with the competition, who at that time was largely Chinese, and probably at their core were better manufacturers than was Finisar. So the thesis is I came into the company, we got an inbound offer. It wasn't like I was looking to sell the company, but we got an inbound offer from a company called 26, and we were able to convert on that and sell the company. And I think it was a good outcome for Finisar, really good outcome for our shareholders. But it turned out to be a really good outcome for 26 as well, because now, fast forward a couple of years after the acquisition was completed, there was the whole geopolitical situation, and now it became in favor to be a U.S. company and be able to provide a set of technology that was distinct from the competition, which was all Chinese. It ended up being a big win for the 26 team as well.
And so then this position came up at Synaptics.
Yeah, then I was, it was pretty clear. We sold the company. I was out of a job, and Synaptics had also made a decision to part ways with their CEO earlier in the year. So they were without a CEO for 5 or 6 months, and I had actually interviewed. Interestingly enough, I had interviewed for the Synaptics job in 2011 when my predecessor ended up getting the job. So I was familiar with the board. I'd had a couple of go rounds with interviews. Of course, all the board members told me, "Hey, we voted for you in 2011," which somebody didn't. So I don't know who it was, but somebody didn't, because I didn't get the job.
Yeah.
But I was lucky enough to have some familiarity with the company and was able to dovetail very quickly into this role.
Excellent. What I mean, with a company now, there's I think I've read quite a lot about and we spoke as well when I met you in your office a couple of years ago. The focus now on the IoT and the I mean, there's all this talk in the industry about AI, and I think I wrote a piece as well at the beginning of the year on sort of this whole edge intelligence and in the connected intelligence. I guess there's so much opportunity for you, and then how do you? I mean, you talked about sort of finding the areas to focus on. How do you find the areas to focus on? Is it because you see that as a market opportunity, or you're seeing it with customers? Tell us a little bit about the game plan right now.
Yeah, again, super question, super lead in. Look, we talk about it internally as an IoT system, as a sensor, a processor, and some way to connect back to a larger internet or the cloud. So sense, process, connect. That's the way we think about the company. Historically, the company has been on the sensors, the touch sensors, display drivers, fingerprint sensors. That's really the foundation of the company. But we think that our opportunity is more around the processor piece and around connectivity. And why do we think that? Well, the processors, it's interesting. We see the world somewhat, and you wrote about this in your piece, we see this world as one that will move from a cloud-based AI system to, in certain instances, an edge-based AI system. And so what we think we're uniquely bringing to the table in processors is the ability to run AI, do machine learning on the device itself. And you and I had this discussion when we spoke a year or so back. We're really bringing that to bear. And what's happened is our core business in processors is actually in video. We've historically played in set-top boxes and video streamers and things of that nature. But people have looked at our products and said, geez, this fits perfectly in an embedded environment. It might be a video conferencing system. It might be a smart sign. It might be, something like home automation. And so our customers have come to us and say, hey, can we just reapply this product?
Yes.
And by the way, you're running a neural network on the chip. Can we actually import some of our machine learning models onto the device itself and run a mini AI at the edge?
Yeah.
And so it's been a combination, I guess, of customer pull, some luck. I mean, the technology that we sort of intended for another market is very, very applicable to an deeply embedded edge processing market. And then the third element, of course, sense, process, now connect. Again, we talked about this a year or so back. We did an acquisition that turns out to be, again, a win-win with Broadcom, where we acquired the business that I was involved in for 16 or so years, the wireless connectivity business. We have the wireless connectivity from assets from Broadcom. We've been able to build our own products that are tailored for the IoT market based on a significant starting point, and that's the Broadcom database.
I think it's a real opportunity there, and especially the embedded vision is something in media we see so much of in terms of like people creating products in that area. So I think, and sort of the application opportunities. So I think that's a big area. Tell me, what excites you most about technology today? What is a thing that you sort of wake up every day and think, wow, this is a future I'm building. This is what really excites me. I obviously it's going to be related to what you're doing today, but there must be something broader for you because you've been in that that Fairchild inheritance family, and there's so much there, I guess, in terms of the vision.
Yeah, look, I think you're right. I mean, very near term, it's this opportunity we have in front of us on processors and wireless. We're newbies. We're getting a lot of questions about, look, show us. You guys are the new kids on the block. Yes, you talk a good game, but can you actually execute? You used the word a minute ago, execute, and I think that's exciting. But what sort of the long term and where I've gotten involved even personally is med tech. And I think the application and confluence of semiconductors, of AI, and medicine is something that's super interesting. I've obviously been lucky enough to make some money along the way, and part of where I'm applying that money is to med tech investments, and I've got a series of them. Some friends where we've put out some significant capital into medical and medical related companies that are using, in some cases, semiconductor technology to advance the understanding of health. Certainly in every instance, there's an application of AI in health. And, I think as we look out 10, 15 years, this is going to be really, really big, that confluence of healthcare, semiconductors, and AI.
Interesting. I read a piece somewhere, and I think it might have been one of the financial newspapers early this year again, on domain-specific AI. And there's another AI company that was very much hardware focused, which I interviewed last year, and they've focused now on the sort of medical sector. So I think it's quite interesting that you talk about that. I think that it is a big opportunity there.
Yeah, there was a company that I was involved in. As I was ramping down at Broadcom and ramping up on Finisar, we ended up selling that company to Apple. But the idea was, it was a kind of a media related company, right? Where we were actually ingesting videos from CNN, from Fox, we had a huge amount of training data. And what you realize in AI is training data is everything. And so the group that ended up pulling that company off and having a really, really successful outcome with Apple has now taken the same ideas that we need a lot of training data, and they're actually applying that to med tech. And so I'm a small investor in the company, but the idea is that they have they're able, through HIPAA, it's actually amazing, to get a tremendous amount of medical records and things like that. And they're actually better able to predict outcomes for women who are undergoing in vitro fertilization. That's the idea, is because the success rate for IVF is horrendously bad. But they've been able to use AI and use training data to really increase the success probability by figuring out the right algorithm. And look, this is the right way to get all of this to work. So I think, to your point, there's an incredible opportunity that we're just beginning to scratch the surface on.
So what excites, in answer to my question, I guess your answer is, what excites you most is that whole opportunity in sort of healthcare and applying technology in the medical and the healthcare sector.
Yeah, that's right. I'm super keen on that as we look out, right? It's a huge opportunity.
What do you think has been, it's been a very fantastic career. What's been your greatest achievement, do you think?
Look, it was super fun at Broadcom in the early days. Just going back to our earlier part of our discussion, I joined Broadcom in 2001, and the group that I joined, I was a marketing person in the group, and the group that I ended up joining was sort of looking for a future. They were the company that Broadcom acquired. Broadcom grew through acquisition in the early days, and the company was focused on something called home phone line networking, HPNA.
So,
And it was pretty clear that home phone line networking wasn't going to go anywhere. What are we going to go do? So there was a decision made. Look, let's try this new technology called Wi-Fi, right? And Wi-Fi was not what Wi-Fi is today in 2001. And so we were really part of driving Wi-Fi into what now is Wi-Fi. And there's been studies done with college kids that they'd give up coffee, they'd give up, pizza, but they can't give up their Wi-Fi. And I'm just super proud of what we were able to do at Broadcom. We ended up it was one of the fastest growing businesses in semiconductor history. We were able to take something from literally from zero to $4 or $5 billion in revenue in an incredibly short period of time. Obviously, it was, hey, Wi-Fi was a tremendous success, but to your point, we executed unbelievably well.
Yeah.
And that, part of that was the folks that were part of my team ended up being luminaries at Qualcomm, at NXP. I mean, almost everybody that was part of our team and reported to me ended up leading big Wi-Fi initiatives at the major companies. So Intel, I mean, every single one was my sort of tree. And I'm very, very proud of that too. We had a great team, and many of those folks have gone on to tremendous success in their career. And as I look back, growing and grooming some of those folks to the success that they've become, I'd like to take a small part of the credit. I don't know if I did. It has been really, really satisfying watching those folks take it and run.
And I think previous guests on this show have also sort of talked about the Bluetooth, the Wi-Fi, Gopi Siraneni, and Miriam Rafagaram. So I think they're really enthused about those. It seems to be in the last 50 years probably this is one of the big areas. The Wi-Fi, obviously the processor as well, but the Wi-Fi seems to be the big achievement for a lot of people.
It's a big one. I mean, it's as I say, it's very, very ubiquitous. You can go in any airport, any coffee shop. I was just on travel, and it was in all the restaurants, right? It's an incredibly ubiquitous technology and so useful. I mean, this conversation right now is happening over Wi-Fi. So
exactly. Let's sort of move on a little bit. What are your hobbies outside of work? Do you have any time for anything?
I'm a pretty competitive person, so a lot of it is spent on sport.
Okay.
I run almost every single day. I love to play tennis. I like to ski, scuba dive. So a lot of activity. Something that you alluded to in a preamble that I saw that we haven't talked about is higher education. That's another big passion of mine. I've been lucky enough to be able to give back some significant donations to University of California, which I came from the University of California, and I spent a lot of time with UC Davis, the actual campus that I came from, working with the dean of the business school, the dean of engineering, the chancellor on, look, how do we create an environment in the United States that's better for engineers? I mean, if you look at how we're growing here at Synaptics, a large portion of our workforce is foreign educated. We have very, very few U.S. educated engineers in the building today. And that's a problem, I think, for the U.S. as we think forward. We talk a lot about now there's the CHIPS Act and manufacturing and things like that. I don't know that that's really solving a key problem for the United States. If you look at the decision I made at Finisar, manufacturing, I think, is probably better done overseas, but the generation of intellectual property is where the United States and Western Europe excels and can stay ahead of competition from Asia. And what both Western Europe and the United States are sort of not doing well is educating engineers and generating the next generation of our workforce. We're depending a lot on overseas foreign educated employees, and I think that's a problem, a huge problem we want to tackle.
I mean, it is part of the Asian culture, and I'm a product of that. Yeah, and I've seen it in China as well, where people just wanted to learn computer science, electronics, and system design, system engineering. So I think there is that challenge to get over in sort of the Western world, I guess.
Yeah, you made a funny comment, which is, for me, it's unusual. Maybe that the kids don't want to follow what their parents did. In this case, my father. I can tell you, for my kids, I have two early career kids. They wanted nothing to do with engineering. So that your thesis is absolutely correct. One of them is in finance, and one of them is in like data analytics. So, but it's a problem. I mean, I suggested, hey, look, engineering, good career, right? It's done right by me, and there was just not that interest for either of them to take on an engineering career. Whereas in India and China, as you correctly say, I mean, it's absolutely the thing, and the parents are pushing it, the environment is pushing it. Yeah, the education system is geared toward it. I mean, India in particular and China are, two of the best education systems in the world. And so, we need to get back. The United States and Western Europe had some of the best education systems in the world for computer science, for engineering. That's where my father came from. That's where I came from. Yeah. We need to figure that formula out again.
Well, that's another conversation, and I think it's part of investment in education, and that's kind of what you're doing with UC Davis, I guess. But let's move on. We'll have another conversation about that sometime. Yeah, I'd like to bring this to a little bit of a conclusion. So tell me, whatever you've learned over the last over your career, what would you tell a young Michael now in terms of career advice or just advice in general, what to do with life? And I know you've got children, and maybe they won't listen, but the young Michael might.
I'm not sure the young Michael will either. Maybe have more fun. I think I really was very, very focused on career, and I think what I did to set myself apart. I'm not the smartest person by any stretch, but I think I worked incredibly hard and put a lot of my life into work. And now, as I look back, there was a lot of years that were spent with an incredible focus. And look, it's worked out really, really well from a career standpoint. But did I do all the things that I would have liked to do? And did I make all the choices that I would have liked? Probably some different choices along the way, biased more toward fun and maybe less toward career. And, I don't know that I would be where I was today if I didn't make those decisions. I don't know that's the be all end all either, that, having a full life and having a lot of fun along the way is probably really, really important.
Well, Michael, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I really enjoyed that. So thank you very much.
And thank you. I love the conversation. You really made it really a lot of fun.